Hi y'all, this is Grace from Grace Ann Studio, and today we are covering beginner brush lettering with the Tombow dual brush pens. So the first thing that you need to know about Tombow dual brush pens is that you have to use a nice smooth paper with them so that you're not fraying your tips. I like to use marker paper or tracing paper for lettering. There are also several other suggestions on the Tombow website and in several Tombow USA blogs as well. The Tombow dual brush pens are larger than the Fudenosuke. You can see they have a larger brush tip. And the second thing you need to know about them is that they write larger than the Fudenosuke also. So if you're used to working with the Fudenosuke, just make sure that you're making an adjustment with the size of your writing, because writing really small with these dual brush pens, it'll work, but you really get the most out of your pen. And you see the exaggeration between your upstrokes and downstrokes more when you're writing big. Before we dive into the basic strokes and warm-ups of calligraphy or brush calligraphy with the Tombow dual brush pens, let's go over the basic anatomy. The first stroke you'll need to know is a downstroke. And a downstroke is going to be the downward stroke of your pen. So it's going to be this first thick line, and you apply it using thick pressure. Your upstrokes are the second stroke we'll talk about, and they are this thin stroke that you see, and you create an upstroke when your pen is moving up. To create it, because this is a flexible brush tip, it's going to create different strokes based on the amount of pressure that you apply to it. So with the downstrokes, I'm pressing down hard on my pen and using a lot of pressure, but on the upstrokes, I'm just barely gliding pen across the page to create this really nice thin line. Next, we have our entrance stroke and the exit stroke. So the exit stroke is the stroke that you create at the end of your letter. In this case, it's right here in the R, and the exit stroke becomes the entrance stroke for the next letter. So when you're connecting letters, which we'll get into this more, but this exit stroke is going to be very important. In addition to just upstrokes and downstrokes, there are, of course, specific strokes that have to do with letters. For example, the descending loop and the ascending loop. So both of these strokes have to do with whether your letter has an ascender or descender, of course. In addition, there's also your overturns, your underturns, and your ovals as well. But we'll get into all of that when we get to our basic strokes, which is right now. There's several basic strokes that you'll need to know in calligraphy in order to form letters. The first one, just like we talked about, is the downstroke. Again, because the Tombow dual brush pen has such a large brush tip, you'll want to apply pressure and make sure that you're writing big enough to take advantage of the full width of your potential downstrokes. To create that, you simply fill it in there. For your upstrokes, again, very light pressure, and you're using just the very tip of the brush tip. This stroke is called an overturn, and you are starting here with an upstroke and you are turning your pen over. So to create this stroke, you're starting that transition from an upstroke into a downstroke. Likewise, the underturn, this one starts with a downstroke and transitions to an upstroke. A lot of pressure, lightening up on the pressure and curving that around. There's also an oval, which of course you'll see in lots of different letters. Now the downstroke for the oval is going to depend on the letter. For example, this would be a good oval for a D if you were creating one, but on the opposite side of that, if you were creating a B or a P, you would start with the upstroke, but move it in the opposite direction to create the thickness on the correct side of the letter. So I would practice ovals with the thickness on each side. There's also the complex curve, which combines the underturn and the overturn. Again, you start with an upstroke, transition to a downstroke, and back to an upstroke. So These turns are really going to be your best bet for practice. The downstrokes and the upstrokes, those are great, but most of your strokes are going to have some kind of a curve to them, and lots of people have problems with this section right here being thick. So you really want to practice these drills to make sure that this section is nice and thin when you're transitioning to that upstroke. Likewise, again, with a little bit of a curve, there's what's called an ascending loop, which is here. And this would be, for an example, an H or a B or a D. And a descending loop, so that's going to start with your downstroke and transition into an upstroke. And that would be like for a J or a G or a Y. So the neat thing about calligraphy is once you've mastered these strokes, you can create any letter just by combining them. So let's get to it. Now that we've learned what all of the basic strokes are and how to create them, let's talk about pen position. Pen position, of course, is the placement and how you're holding the pen in your hand. Now, typically when you're writing, as you probably saw earlier in the video, your hand is going to be scrunched like this, and you're really writing basically right on top of your letter, if at a slight angle. Now, that is really going to only use the tip of your pen, and if you're holding your pen like this to create calligraphy, you can get thicks and thins, but you are not going to get nice, consistently even lines. You want to loosen your grip, pull back on the pen a little bit, and make sure you're holding the pen in the crook of your hand. Now, I promise this will not feel natural at first. It didn't feel natural at first to me, but once you get used to this position and holding your pen this way, your strokes are going to be so much more even, and they're also going to be able to use the entire length of the pen. What I mean by that is when you're holding your pen like this, straight up and down, there's no way to press down and get nice thick downstrokes without ruining your tips. And we all know that we want to try to preserve the tips of our brush pens as much as possible. Keep that at a 45-degree angle, move your hand back, and keep the pen right here in the crook of your thumb. And that is going to help you to create these nice, consistent downstrokes and even upstrokes. The first set of letters that we're going to talk about are what I would consider your small curved letters. To create these, you start with a nice upstroke, move into a downstroke, and finish with an upstroke. So as you can see, this is going to be our oval, but it's going to have a slight opening to create that C. Now, of course, that is going to be a print C, but since we're creating calligraphy, you want to make sure that you're finishing your strokes with an exit stroke. Okay, and of course, if it's the first letter of a word, you could also have an entrance stroke there as well. Starting with an upstroke, transitioning to a downstroke, and into our exit stroke. Okay, another small curved letter is a W. So for W, you are going to start with a downstroke, transition to an upstroke. So we have our underturn. You'll have another underturn. And then again, this would be a print W, but you need an exit stroke. So it's very important to add this little hook, right? But it's a teeny tiny exit stroke. So when you're combining letters, you're not directly writing on top of that last upstroke, making it look like a U. So you always want to make sure that you're including that little hook. Other small letters are S, V, and X as well, and you would use the same basic principles for those. The next set is vowels, and of course those are A, E, I, O, U, and it has a lot of the same principles as our small curved letters. To start, we'll draw an A, start with an upstroke, into a downstroke, and back up into an upstroke. Now, lots of times I see people start A's with a downstroke, and that means that you're going to miss out on this nice thin section up here at top. So make sure that you're starting with an upstroke and you have this section right here, and it'll really just help to define the A. And of course, we're adding the tail again with our exit stroke, which is just going to be a underturn, essentially. People will have their own style, so your underturns or exit strokes may end up looking more like this. They may have more attitude, be a little bit flippier. I tend to do my lettering more like this. Lots of people prefer the rounded version as well. But once you get the basics down, you can really play with the style and make it your own as well. Same thing with an E. Start in the middle, transition to your downstroke, and then back to your upstroke. And again, make sure you have that exit stroke there at the bottom as well. Now, lots of times, this overturn here ends up not being the same thickness. So you probably noticed I went over it a couple of times in my first one, and that was just to even up the thickness, which is totally fine. Nobody is going to do it perfectly every time, and all you have to do is just know how to make it a little bit better. And you can absolutely go over your lettering to even it out and smooth it out some too. And of course our other vowels are I, O, and U. Our next set of letters all have ascender loops. So to start, we'll have a B. We'll start with our ascender loop stroke, which again has an upstroke that transitions into a straight downstroke. And then to finish our B, we'll have an oval. And again, for that exit stroke, I typically bring my oval around and through. People also write Bs like this to connect it in a little bit more of a traditional way, or you can loop your B around, that exit stroke around, and bring it down a little bit and curve it back up. Again, all of these are going to depend on your style, but just make sure that you do have that exit stroke so that you're able to connect your B in another way. Another ascender loop is F, and this one we are going to start with our upstroke, transition to our downstroke, and we're going to go all the way down into our descender loop as well. So you're combining the descender loops and the ascender loop, and then of course adding your exit stroke as well. And this one of course has lots of opportunities for variation. You could extend the upstroke for the ascender loop. You could exaggerate the ascender loop and make your descender loop quite small. You could have the opposite, where your ascender loop is smaller and the bottom is bigger. And again, it's really just going to depend on your own style. But once you get the basics down of these letters, you can absolutely make them your own. The other ascender loop letters are H, L, D, K, and potentially R. Now this set of letters is a set of small straight downstrokes. So this one consists of M, T, N, and R. And M is going to start with a straight downstroke. And then to connect it, you'll have two overturns with an exit stroke. And again, you can create very curved exit strokes. You can bounce the letters a little bit, but for the most part, you just want to keep practicing that connection between the different overturns. And of course there's T, which also has a straight downstroke, and that comes straight up into its exit stroke. The easiest way to cross a T is of course simply a cross. Typically I see people like to give it a little bit more style though, so you could just add a slight curve, or once you really get into flourishing, you could add some really nice flourishes to it. And of course the other straight downstrokes are N and R. Now let's talk about descenders. Descenders, of course, are letters that have that descender stroke or letters that have a tail that descends below the baseline. The first one we'll cover is going to be G, and G starts with an oval and finishes with our descender line. And of course, you want to extend that through to make sure that you're having an exit stroke for connections as well. Now on descender loops, people start to add a lot of variation to these as well, a lot of style, and of course that's going to depend on your personal style. But really you just want to make sure that you're getting that nice oval. Again, just like the A, you want to make sure that you have this little upstroke there at the top of the G. Otherwise, it just doesn't look quite right with this thickness at the top. If that's your style, great, go for it, but typically it's a little bit more legible if you add the upstroke there. The next descender letter that we're going to go through will be Y, and of course this one just starts with an underturn, and you add on your descender loop. So again, all of these letters can be built using just those basic strokes that we learned at the beginning. And again, your Y can have all kinds of flourishes added to it. It just depends on your style and what you want to add. Now our other descender letters are Z, P, J, and Q. Now that we've covered all of our letters, let's talk about connections and figure out how to put them together to make some words. Now, to connect letters, because we are so diligent about adding that exit stroke, it's really quite simple. So to start, draw your first letter. In this case, I'm drawing an H. And we added our exit stroke, so to connect them, all you want to do is draw your next letter so that the downstroke covers up the end of that exit stroke. So when you're creating an exit stroke, you want to try to bring it all the way up to the X height, which if we are looking at calligraphy or at our anatomy again, the baseline is here where all of your letters sit. The cap height is going to be about here where all of your capital letters would go. There's also an ascender line where the top of your ascenders sit, as well as a descender line where your descender loops will hit. And then the X height is going to be the height of all of your smaller letters. So the bottom hoop of the H, your E, A, all of your small curved letters, your vowels, your small straight down strokes, anything that is hitting about middle, you want it to sit at that X height. So if you extend your exit stroke up to the X height, it's really quite simple, and you make sure that there's plenty of room to still have a letter, and you're not going to be encroaching on the previous letter's space. So you see how there's a lot of space here and not so much here. This isn't going to really read as well. You want to have enough space between the letters that it's legible. So really make sure that you're extending your exit strokes so that you can create your connections easily. So here, let's start again down here below. Again, we'll start with H. And I extended that exit stroke up. And I'm going to have my E sit directly on top of the exit stroke. Bring that exit stroke out a little bit more to give my E some space from my L. Adding my L's, and finally finishing with my O. Now, there are lots of ways to practice lettering. Some people like to write the alphabet over and over again. Some people like to write words over and over again. Some people really like to practice drills. However you really like to practice, that's going to be the best way for you to do so. I can sit here and say, do drills, it'll make you better, and it will, but you have to enjoy the practice too. So for me, I prefer writing the alphabet. So I tend to write the alphabet in whatever style I'm trying to work on, and I just write out the entire thing to practice. I'll fill up pages and pages of tracing paper. I'll go back and look at adjustments and think, I don't like the top of that F, I should work on it, my connection at my D wasn't very good. You can go through and really see your progress as you're looking back at these previous practice sheets as well. So now that we know how to practice, let's put it all together and create a little lettering practice for us to hang up and inspire us. I've really enjoyed going through this with you, and I hope you really enjoyed it as well. Now that you've learned all of your basic strokes and how to make your connections, you'll be forming words and creating lettering pieces before you know it. If you do make them and you post them on social media, be sure to tag @GraceAnnStudio and @TomboUSA so we can cheer you on. Thanks and happy lettering!